Dear learners, welcome to the course Disaster Management Strategies. As you know, Module 6, titled Disaster Risk Reduction, consists of two units. The first unit of these is Unit 11, that is Disaster Risk Reduction. Today, we will explore this unit together. I am excited to have with you on this journey and let's get started. Welcome to this video on Unit 11, that is building on the planning and strategies discussed in Unit 10 and the phases of disaster management explored in Unit 9. This unit focuses on disaster risk reduction, the proactive heart of modern disaster management. Disaster risk reduction represents a global shift from merely reacting to disasters towards preventing and minimizing risk before they turn into crisis. As disasters intensify due to climatic change, urbanization, and other factors, understanding disaster risk reduction, that is DRR, is essential for building resilient communities and sustainable development. In this unit, we will trace the evolution of disaster risk reduction concepts and explore the core principles, then examine international frameworks like the Yokohama Strategy, the Hyogo Framework, the Sendai Framework, and discuss India's commitments through the National Disaster Management Plan, that is termed as NDMP. By the end, you will realize how disaster risk reduction integrates with the development to save lives, reduce losses, and foster long-term resilience. After studying this unit, you will be able to explain the concept of disaster risk reduction, that is DRR, and its shift from reactive to proactive approaches. You will be able to describe the key concepts of disaster risk, hazard exposure, vulnerability, and capacity, and how disaster risk reduction addresses them. You will be able to outline the historical evolution of global disaster risk reduction frameworks, including the Yokohama Strategy, the Hyogo Framework for Action, and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, that is from the year 2015 to 2030. You will be able to analyze India's implementation of DRR through the NDMP, that is National Disaster Management Framework, and related initiatives. This unit will also help you understand the importance of multi-stakeholder, people-centered approaches in achieving the effective DRR. The concept of disaster risk reduction. Historically, societies and governments primarily focused on emergency response and relief, providing aid only after a disaster had struck. This reactive approach often led to repeated cycles of loss as the root causes remain unaddressed. However, towards the late 20th century, experts, researchers, and policymakers began to recognize that many disaster losses could be prevented or greatly reduced by managing risk before hazards occur. Influenced by devastating events like cyclones, earthquakes, and floods, this shift emphasized prevention over cure, making the birth of modern risk reduction, that is DRR, disaster risk reduction. While we cannot always control the severity or frequency of natural disasters or hazards, such as earthquakes, cyclones, floods, droughts, but we can significantly reduce their impacts. This is achieved by lowering exposure, that is, the people, the infrastructure, and assets located in hazard prone areas, and reducing vulnerability, that is social, economic, and physical weaknesses that amplify the harm. Strengthening capacity, like the resources, knowledge, systems that enable communities to resist cope with the disaster and recover from such shocks. Disaster risk reduction is defined as a systematic proactive approach to identifying, assessing, and reducing the risks of disasters. It aims to safeguard lives, livelihoods, health, cultural heritage, economic assets, and ecosystems, particularly for the most vulnerable groups such as low income communities, women, children, the elderly, and persons with disabilities. DRR applies not only to natural hazards but also to human made, example industrial accidents, or hybrid threats like pandemics by climate events, minimizing adverse impacts through planned evidence based actions. At its core is a simple yet powerful equation. That is, the equation is disaster risk is equal to hazard into exposure into vulnerability, the whole thing divided by capacity. That is, dr is equal to hazard into exposure into vulnerability and the whole thing divided by capacity. In the equation, hazard means the potential threatening event or processes, example heavy rainfall, seismic activity like earthquake, chemical spill, and hazards are often unavoidable but their effects can be managed. Here in the equation, the term exposure means the elements at risk, for example, people, buildings, infrastructure, agriculture, or ecosystems located in hazard prone zones, example, coastal settlements facing cyclones. The term vulnerability in the equation means the conditions that increase susceptibility to harm, such as poverty or limited access to safe housing, poor urban planning, gender inequalities, or environmental degradation. Example, deforested hillsides are more prone to landslides. That is the term vulnerability. And again, then we come to the next term, capacity. Capacity means the strengths and the resources available to anticipate, withstand, and recover, such as early warning systems, community knowledge, insurance, or resilient infrastructure. That these are all defined by the term capacity. Effective DRR is not a top-down imposition, but a balanced integration of top-down actions like national policies, laws, funding, and institutional frameworks like building codes and enforced by governments. The bottom up efforts include local and community led initiatives drawing on indigenous knowledge and grassroots participation. This requires a people centered and multi sectoral approach, engaging all parts of society, like government at all levels, NGOs, private sector, academia, civil society, and the citizens themselves. It fosters a culture of prevention and resilience, where risk awareness becomes everyday practice and communities are empowered to act before disasters strike. So, people centered approach is one of the most important approaches in DRR. In essence, DRR transforms disasters from inevitable tragedies into manageable challenges, saving lives, reducing economic burdens, and enabling sustainable progress in an increasingly hazard prone world. In the diagram, we see that why DRR matters, that is, the global impacts and drivers. Disasters continue to inflict immense human, economic, and environmental suffering worldwide, underscoring the urgent need for disaster risk reduction. According to the Emergency Events Disaster Database, that is EMDAT, the global reference maintained by the Center for Research on the Epidemiology, research on the epidemiology of disasters, that is termed as CRED, in the year 2024, saw 393 natural hazard related disasters. These events caused 16,753 deaths, affected 167.2 million people, and generated economic losses of approximately 242 billion US dollars. Weather and climate related events dominated, including extreme heat waves in Asia, severe droughts in Africa, affecting over 25 million, and devastating storms in the Americas, clearly illustrating climate change's amplifying role. Rising temperatures intensify storms, increase flood risk, and prolong droughts, turning hazards into more frequent and severe disasters. The key drives explain these impacts. Population growth in hazard prone areas, that is, more people living in floodplains, coastal zones, or seismic regions, heightens the exposure. Rapid urbanization, unplanned cities often lack resilient infrastructure. These amplify the vulnerability of the communities living there. Environmental degradation, that may include deforestation, wetland loss, and soil erosion, remove natural buffers against floods and landslides. Poverty and inequality. Limited access to safe housing, education, and resources leave these marginalized communities mostly at risk. A significant portion of this devastation is preventable, though. Proven DRR measures such as multi hazard early warning systems, resilient infrastructure, ecosystem restoration, and community preparedness dramatically reduce losses. Studies have shown that consistently high returns, that is, every $1 invested in DRR, can yield around $7 to $15 in saved lives, damages, and recovery costs. Governments worldwide, including India as a Sendai Framework signatory, recognize this by committing to DRR. These efforts break vicious cycles of repeated loss, protect development gains, and align with sustainable development goals, ensuring progress is resilient in a changing climate. Without scaled up DRR, rising hazards threaten to reverse hard won global advancements in poverty reduction and economic stability. Now, coming to the section on evolution of global DRR frameworks. The international community has progressively strengthened disaster risk reduction efforts through landmark conferences and frameworks, making a clear evolution from response focused approaches to comprehensive, proactive risk management. And this journey reflects the growing recognition of disasters as manageable risks rather than inevitable events. Yokohama Strategy and Plan for Action for a Safer World in the year 1994. The World Conference on National Disaster Reduction held in Yokohama, Japan in May 1994 marked the first major global milestone. It launched the Yokohama Strategy and declared the year 1990 to 2000 as the International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction, that is INDDR. This strategy introduced a systematic approach to DRR, emphasizing vulnerability assessment, risk reduction, and resilience building. Key principles that are included are risk assessment as essential before investing in development, preventive measures as more effective and cost efficient than relief, community involvement and environmental protection, early warnings and education for a culture of prevention. It shifted global focus from post disaster response to pre disaster prevention and preparedness, laying the foundation for future frameworks. Now coming to the Hyogo framework for action, that was in between the year 2005 to 2015. Adopted in the year 2005 in January at the World Conference on Disaster Reduction in Kobe, that is Hyogo, Japan, shortly after the devastating 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, by 168 UN member states, the Hyogo Framework for Action, building the resilience of nations and communities to disasters, was a 10-year global blueprint. Building on Yokohama, HFA aimed to sustainably reduce the disaster losses by 2015 through integrated policies. It outlined 5 priorities for action, that is, ensure DRR is a national and local priority with strong institutional basis, identify, assess, and monitor risks and enhance early warning, use knowledge, innovation, and education to build a culture of safety and resilience, reduce underlying risk factors, strengthen disaster preparedness for effective response, and HFA promoted multi-stalker involvement, innovation, example early warnings, and mainstreaming DRR into development, significantly raising the global awareness and institutional commitments. The Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, that was in between the year 2015 to 2030. The current guiding document, the Sendai framework, was adopted in March 2015 at the 3rd UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Sendai, Japan. It exceeded the HFA, incorporating lessons from the implementation and expanding scope to include human-made and technological hazards. That is, it included the industrial accidents, nuclear risks, along with the natural ones. Its overarching goal is to sustainably reduce disaster risk and losses in lives, livelihoods, health and economic, physical, social and cultural, and environmental assets by the year 2030. The framework introduces 7 global targets for measurable progress, that is, sustainable reduce global disaster mortality by 2030, aiming to lower the average per 100,000 global mortality rate in 2020-2030 compared to 2005 to 2015. Sustainably reduce the number of affected people globally by 2030, aiming to lower the average global figure per 100,000 in 2020-2030 compared to 2015, and reduce the risk of economic loss in relation to global gross domestic product, that is GDP, by 2030. It aims to sustainably reduce disaster damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services, including health, educational facilities by 2030. Substantially increase the number of countries with national and local DRR strategies by 2030. Then substantially enhance international cooperation to developing countries through adequate and sustainable support by 2030. It aims to increase the availability of and access to multiple hazard early warning systems and disaster risk information and assessments to people by 2030. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction outlines 4 priorities for action to guide global, national, and local efforts in preventing new risks and reducing the existing ones. It aims to understand disaster risk. The policies and practices must promote comprehensive and risk assessments, data collection, sharing, and scientific analysis and dissemination of risk information and knowledge to all stakeholders, including vulnerable communities. in strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. This involves establishing the key clear roles and responsibilities, developing robust legal and policy framework, ensuring multi-stakeholder coordination across government levels, private sector and civil society, and mainstreaming DRR into sectoral planning. It aims to investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience, that is focus on allocating resources for economic, structural, example resilient infrastructure and non-structural measures like land use planning, ecosystem, restoration, education to enhance societal, economic and environmental resilience. It aims to enhancing the disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. This priority emphasizes on building capacity for timely and effective response, improving early warning systems, conducting drills, and ensuring recovery processes reduce future risks through the Build Back Better principle, rebuilding stronger, safer, and more sustainable. Sendai promotes an inclusive, all hazards, all of society approach, emphasizing health systems, cultural heritage, private sector engagement, and gender equity. As of 2025, ongoing implementation includes midterm reviews and new initiatives like Gender Action Plan of 2024 for intersectional risk management. This evolution from Yokohama's foundational prevention focuses through Haigo's international integration to Sendai's measurable, inclusive targets demonstrates growing global commitment to proactive DRR aligned with sustainable development and climate action. DRR in India, the alignment with the national plans. In this section, let us see how India ranks among the world's most disaster vulnerable countries, facing frequent floods, cyclones, earthquakes, droughts, and landslides due to its geography, dense population, and climate change impacts. As a committed signatory to the Sendai framework, India has integrated its priorities into national policies, marking a proactive shift risk reduction. The National Disaster Management Plan, that is NDMP, first released in 2016 and revised in November 2019, currently as of 2025-2026, serves as India's flagship document for building disaster resilient and minimizing losses. Prepared by the National Disaster Management Authority, that is NDMA, it aligns closely with Sendai's 4 priorities and 7 targets covering all disaster phases: prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery, as detailed in the earlier unit number 9. The NDMP emphasizes 6 thematic areas for focused action. First one is mainstreaming and integrating DRR with institutional strengthening, embedding risk reduction in development policies and bolstering institutions like NDMA, SDMA, and DDMAs. Capacity development, training programs and skill building for officials, responders, and communities. The third one is promoting participatory approaches, involving local communities and stakeholders in planning. Then, working with elected representatives, like engaging panchayats and legislators for grassroots implementation. The next one is grievance redress and mechanisms, ensuring accountability and feedback systems, promoting quality standards, certifications, and awards, that is, recognizing best practices and enforcing resilient standards. The recent enhancements include the Disaster Management Amendment Act of 2025, which establishes urban disaster management authorities, empowers state disaster response forces, and improves data management for better coordination. The key initiatives showcasing India's proactive DRR commitment are Abda Mitra scheme, launched in 2016. This trains community volunteers as first responders. By 2025, over 1 lakh volunteers have been trained in 350 vulnerable districts with extensions like Yuva Abda Mitra focusing on youth from NCC, NSS, and NYKS. The National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project, that is NICRMP, a World Bank assistance program in phases 1 and 2 that builds cyclone shelters, early warning systems, and infrastructure in coastal states, significantly reducing casualties. Example, Orissa's model. Importance of multi-stakeholder, people-centered approaches in achieving effective disaster risk reduction. Multi-stakeholder approaches in DRR involve collaboration among diverse actors, including government, NGOs, and private sector, communities, academia, and international organizations to pool resources, expertise, and perspectives for comprehensive risk management. The people-centered approaches, on the other hand, prioritize the needs, knowledge, and participation of affected individuals and communities, ensuring that strategies are inclusive, empowering, and grounded in local realities. Together, these methods form the backbone of effective DRR, as emphasized in global frameworks like the Sendai framework, by promoting resilience through shared responsibility and tailored solutions. One key importance in enhanced inclusivity and empowerment is people-centered strategies empower vulnerable groups such as women, children, elderly, and marginalized communities by involving them in decision making, which fosters ownership, responsibility, and long-term behavioral changes for risk reduction. The bottom up involvement ensures that DRR efforts address real, on the ground needs, reducing exclusion and building trust. For instance, community participation programs provide actionable guidelines for inclusive DRM, leading to more sustainable outcomes. Multi stakeholder collaboration also improves efficiency and effectiveness. By integrating various sectors like health, agriculture, infrastructure, it enhances service delivery at international, national, and local levels, minimizing the gaps and duplication. This leads to better resource allocation, innovative solutions, and streamlined humanitarian operations, ultimately making DRR more cost effective and impactful. For example, the partnerships can tackle complex cascading hazards by involving risk owners from government and private entities, ensuring accountability for both natural and man-made risks. Furthermore, these approaches enable comprehensive all of society coverage. They address global challenges like climate change, adaptation, by fostering multi-sectoral coordination, which is crucial for building resilience across the interconnected systems. An all of society model promotes risk informed decisions, integrating diverse stakeholders to create a holistic ecosystem for prevention and response. This is particularly vital in local partnerships where cooperation among stakeholders ensures DRR practices are context specific and sustainable. In summary, multi stakeholder, people centered approaches are essential for effective DRR because they drive inclusivity, efficiency, and comprehensive resilience building, transforming isolated efforts into collaborative, empowering systems that save lives and protect livelihoods. In conclusion, we have gone through the transformative concept of disaster risk reduction from its historical roots to the ambitious Sendai framework. And DRR is not just a technical field, it is a commitment to protecting vulnerable lives, sustainable development, and building a resilient future. By understanding risk components, addressing drivers, and embracing global priorities, we can prevent hazards from becoming disasters. India remembers that DRR is everyone's responsibility. Through awareness, participation, and action, we create safer communities. Keep applying these insights. Thank you.